uh-oh, is this camera sensor too good? That's such a dumb intro. This is part 2 of our look at new smartphone camera technology. Part 1 focused on all the good stuff we should expect from a 1-inch type sensor, why these new sensors are so exciting. If you haven't seen that video, you should pause this now, watch that, then come back here. You're good? All right, let's go. A single piece of camera hardware cannot live in a vacuum. You change one thing and it has a ripple effect on all the other aspects of using a camera, the lens, the software, etc., etc. For all of our pros, all the good things, we have to balance some different cons and compromises. Starting with compromise number 1, maybe you get too much light. That's usually not a problem, right? If we can soak up more light, we can create brighter, more vivid, and less noisy photos. But what about video or long exposures? It's not a problem if your phone uses a crazy fast shutter for a photo. In fact, it's usually desirable where we can better freeze movement or action. But video is another story. We can't reduce light hitting the sensor. At the time this video was shot, none of the 1-inch sensor phones had a variable aperture to reduce the amount of light hitting the sensor. So the only way our phones can do this for video is to use a really fast shutter speed. And sure, you set the camera to 24 frames per second, but each individual frame has a shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second. That's crazy sharp and edgy looking. 24 FPS does not look cinematic with a super fast shutter like that. It looks stuttery. Currently on a phone like this, the only way we can fix that is by using a neutral density filter, which is less convenient to snap on to the back of a phone. Compromise number 2. Maybe we get too much blur in our depth of field. Again, adding to our aperture woes, sometimes we have too shallow a depth of field. Phones are convenient for those point and shoot moments, those Instagrammable group shots. But because we can't stop down this lens and aperture, we might get stuck with a shallower depth of field than we'd otherwise want. Position 2 people shoulder to shoulder, and if one is a little farther from the plane of focus, they'll start looking a little blurrier. It's a little worse, even more noticeable when you might have one person in front and another person behind their shoulder. And it takes a little bit of practice to get a feel for how you might want to line up your subjects or position people to get the effect you're really looking for and keep everyone in focus. Especially if you haven't shot on a DSLR or a mirrorless before, you'll kind of be learning about that optical characteristic from scratch here. The depth of field on this phone is directly comparable to proper mirrorless cameras. The look of your shot is going to resemble a full frame camera with a 24mm lens at around f4.5. That's pretty shallow. Normally that's a good thing when we're isolating one subject, but it makes our composition a little tricky trying to organize multiple subjects. And compromise number 3. A big sensor just takes up more physical space. There's no way around it. We can't beat physics. If you have a larger sensor, you need a larger lens, and you need more depth to house all of those lens elements, and our phones don't have a ton of depth or volume to spare. You can't make a sensor like this flush unless you extend the whole casing on the back of the phone, which many of us want. Especially on a camera-focused phone, it would be nice to have a bigger cavity for more battery. But I digress. It means we have to build out from the main body of the phone. This is definitely a bit of a lump sticking out the back of this phone, but considering the enormous sensor size, this is a humongous upgrade over some of our previous wackier camera experiments. I mean, sure, this has a proper telescoping zoom lens, but it's using a significantly smaller sensor, and yeah, that's just a lot more to keep in your pocket. I do kind of miss the classic days of our really wacky camera experiments, though. It'd be nice to start playing with stuff like this again, knowing all the other upgrades that we've seen. Noticeably chunkier than phones with smaller camera sensors, but really, honestly, right now, my least favorite part of this is that often the whole camera array, all of the camera sensors, are covered by one piece of glass, which is a larger target for accidental damage on the back of your phone. What I'd personally like to see is isolating each of these camera sensors behind their own protective cover, and then maybe using something that's not glass to cover the rest of the housing. And this is where I reference a point that I kinda made in the previous video in part 1. More exotic and more expensive technology should be used with purpose. If your phone photo needs are pretty straightforward, point and shoot photos, mostly in good light, and you can hold still for a longer night mode shot, I think it's likely you'll get a better photo easier out of a less expensive phone. These smaller camera sensors are really well understood. The software which processes the photos from these smaller sensors, that software is really mature. We keep selling the idea of bestest camera on the most expensive popular brands like Apple and Samsung. And we keep trying to push consumers to the most expensive options from those two companies just to cover the basics. Should be pretty clear. I think that's very bad financial tech advice if we don't consider the type of photography the user might be interested in. It's like giving someone a super expensive mirrorless camera right now. They're probably not going to get better photos out of it. They're probably going to get worse photos than if they used an inexpensive mid-ranger phone. And you don't have to take my word for it. There's a reason why really good mid-ranger inexpensive phones score so well in blind taste test camera comparisons when those photos are focused on simple setups and selfies. Like if you could just put this phone in someone's hands and not tell them how much it cost, they would not assume it was as affordable as it is. Or maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe I've missed something crucial. I'm sure folks will let me know down in the comments below. And when you're rushing off to the comments, maybe smash that bell icon on your way down. There's a huge spectrum. There's a gulf of difference between photo composition and sharing social media posts. And we should be talking about all cameras, especially phone cameras, celebrating those different pros and cons for different consumers to make sure we're all getting the exact right fit gadget for our specific needs. I hope you've enjoyed some of this conversation, and I hope we've been able to mix it up a little in the comments on what makes a better phone camera for what you like to shoot. As always, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos, subscribing to the channel. All the support lately has been absolutely fantastic. If you're clicking on links, joining conversations, subscribing, hitting my home site, or joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. This list is basically the coolest collection of tech pals in the omniverse. So I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch, spending a bit more time on the Mastodons and sharing photos on a Flickr account for better high-resolution photo sharing. A little less so on the Facebooks and the Instagrams, but I will catch you all on the next video.